think that should pretty much do it. Eleanor, should we kick off?
Are we there? Okie dokie. Second. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to Series 4 of our Talent Hub, powered by Mindcore. So as you know, we've been running the series for the last couple of weeks, and we are now on the final session. Today, we're going to be talking to you about succession plan, around motivation, incentives, and remuneration models. So far, we've covered high performance teams, succession planning, performance management, and hiring. Really amazing. Thank you to all of you who have showed up. And with that, I just want to send out a special welcome to everybody this morning. It's a nice and early start. We aim to finish at about 10 o'clock. And we are going to keep today's session very, very interactive. So please do post your questions in the chat box. Raise your hand if you do have a question for us. And through our moderation team, we will get to you to answer those all-important money questions, which is what we are discussing today. I am Eleanor, and I'm part of EO Johannesburg. I'm also the learning chair for the Accelerator team. And with Josh, Trevor, Natasha, Jackie, Lara, and Kim, who's not with us today, we've been behind getting the Talent Hub up and running. So guys, really, this is for you, powered by EO. All our MEPA members, welcome to the session as well. Please ask your question. This is an interactive session today. And whatever you have on your mind, whatever challenges you're facing in your business, I'm pretty sure around remuneration, this will be answered today. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Natasha, who's a senior specialist at Mindcore, and she's going to take us through the session today. Later on, you're going to hear from Josh just to wrap everything up for us. So thank you very much. Over to you, Natasha.
Thanks, Eleanor. Good morning, and again, welcome to episode 4, which promises to be truly an enlightening and exciting final engagement for the Talent Hub series that we've been going through. Our agenda today is once again focused on addressing the challenges that you as business leaders and EO members have highlighted for us, and specifically focusing on the practical elements whilst trying to position you for success and competitive advantage. Our speakers today are Craig Roth and Sean Barnes from 21st Century. They'll be taking you through an interactive and enlightening talk on retention and reward. They've included the building blocks of remuneration and reward, and have exceptional case studies, so very, very practical. And they've also unpacked the all-important return on investment for managing reward well. Just a bit about Craig. Craig is an executive director at 21st Century Group. He's consulted to over 500 organizations, which is truly, truly impressive, in Southern Africa and internationally for over 20 years now. Craig sits on and advises numerous board committees, and is well known for his exceptional numerous articles written, and is a lead speaker at a number of conferences. So truly excited to welcome you today, Craig. Sean, with over 20 years experience in consulting, is also an executive director, but specifically within the analytics, and he heads up the consulting business for 21st Century on our African continent and in the Middle East business. He spent 13 years at Hay Group as a partner, and after the purchase of Hay Group by Korn Ferry, an additional 3 years there as a senior client partner. Geographically, Sean has successfully managed portfolios in Africa, Middle East, Southeast Asia, to name a few, and has led international projects across 40 countries around numerous industries, including mining, FMCG, and so on. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our speakers, just with a quick reminder, as per Eleanor, to take advantage of this opportunity and to post your questions or let us know if you have any questions. Craig and Sean are both very, very interactive, so you're welcome to engage with them directly as well. Hope you enjoy.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Natasha and Eleanor, for the introductions. We're very excited to be here today. Perhaps if we just start the session off with looking at 21st century's credentials, just to place the talk. Like all good entrepreneurial success stories, 21st Century was started in a garage on a plank of wood, and started by two mates. And really, we've experienced the growing pains of the entrepreneurial environment. We've had to put on our big girls' panties. We've had to move to a place where we've had to get more serious about policy and process and getting things right and getting the structure in place, whilst still keeping that entrepreneurial and family kind of feel to 21st Century, which is why I love working there. You know, you get direct access to a brilliant leadership team. Engagement and culture is still at the forefront of what we do internally, while still presenting a very professional approach to our clients. So it's a wonderful place to be. It's been around for 26 years now. We really had a really tight remuneration focus for about 20 of those years. Started off building a salary survey and really going to companies and saying, look, let's look at how you stack up externally. So running salary surveys and the like, sizing positions, and then doing the design stuff on remuneration. So designing incentive schemes, looking at putting pay scales in place, looking at the policies and the strategies in place to get the right behaviors out of your employees. And then sort of from 20 years, for the last 6, we've been on an incredibly exciting growth journey, and really accelerated growth. We've added a few companies to the stable now, and we're now a group set of companies. You can see the companies on the screen, and really we're sort of an end-to-end human capital consulting business now. In terms of a few of our remuneration credentials, consulted to over 1,000. I'm just trying to get to the next slide here. Bear with me. Over 1,700 clients, and we count that on a 5-year rolling basis, including about 65% of the JSE. We also consult extensively on the African continent, and also quite a bit in the Middle East and Southeast Asia. And perhaps just one last point is we've just joined GECN, which is a global executive compensation network, which behind Willis Towers Watson is the biggest compensation company in the world, and we represent Africa on that. So perhaps just to end this section off with thanking you so much for having us today. We're very excited to share some learnings with you, and you'll see we're unpacking it through some pretty interactive case studies, but we'll get to that now. Sean, over to you for the agenda.
Right, good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending today, and hopefully we can add some relevance to the to one of your biggest costs in your business, in any business actually, which is your staff costs, and all the risks that go together with that, as we know happens in this country. So what we wanted to do is not just make this a Reward 101 session, which is very theoretical. What we're going to try to do with the next hour and a bit is to really take you through what it is that you need as a small business or as an emerging business that isn't so small anymore, but is getting bigger. And how we're going to do that is we've dealt with a lot of cases over the years. I myself, in particular, have worked in parts of the world such as Mauritius, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, and the Middle East, where what we used to call at Hay Group the FOBs, the family-owned businesses, was really almost an area of practice on its own. Entrepreneurial startup type companies have their own needs, their own focuses, and are very different and what they do, your traditionally referred to blue chips. So what we're going to do is we're going to just first have a look at the remuneration elements, because a lot of people over the years have tended to believe you can pay your way out of anything. And if you pay people enough, you solve all your problems. Whereas we've been involved in project after project, which shows that the money is part of it, but is not the whole picture. And very often you're throwing money at areas where you need to throw other things at, and not money, such as career development or training or things like that. So we want to start with just a brief overview of the various remuneration elements and how they tie together to set the scene for how we then move into how reward meets the business maturity curve, and how businesses at various stages of the traditional business school business maturity curve handle rewarding their people, which I must just stress is a sort of a benchmark view born over many years of research from various sources, and how the various companies that are plotted along that curve, where the emphasis really lies with their reward elements and what they're able to offer. What we'll then do is try to take the conversation into more of a live, practical demonstration, where we've lifted some case studies of cases that we've dealt with, specifically with entrepreneurial companies. And in many cases, what we've had to do is as a result of what we refer to as firefighting, or emergency handling of a situation that's gone bad due to a dispute or a legal risk or a statutory risk, or someone's suing somebody now or something to that effect. So the case studies are really to show you how these things work in practice, and really to provide a don't do versus do, that we can then share with you and hopefully get some question in a more practical way. And then we'll give you the case study, the circumstances of the case study, discuss the case study a little, and I'm sure you will recognize all three case studies that we've put up. I'm sure you've bumped into one of the three at some stage in the growth of your business. And what we will then do is we will then go on to discuss what should have been done in that particular case study and how things could have been handled better. My internet seems to be a little weak, so I'm going to hope that improves in the next few minutes. These days, when one is working, find the internet signal with everybody on Zoom, most people from home, the signals do get a little strange now and again. If it persists, I will just turn off my video, because that's good. I've just been told that everybody can hear me. So we will then end off with a discussion, but the discussion isn't just for the end, as Craig mentioned. We'd really like this to be an interactive session. So if you have any questions along the way, please just stop us, or post your questions in the chat, and they will be brought to us. And Natasha will mention them or give us the questions through, and we will attempt to answer them to the best of our ability. So this is just in a nutshell what we've put together for today. Not to have a boring session with some voice droning on about things that nobody understands. We'd like it to be interesting. We'd like it to be real. We'd like it to be practical, and we'd like it to be of some use. Right, moving on. So,
Sean, if I could just jump in there for a sec. When we were going through the agenda, I forgot to mention that we won't be having any breakout sessions today because this topic is just so close to home for everyone. And we're rather focusing on your case studies and questions. So just a quick insert there. Thanks, Sean.
Okay, thanks, Natasha. Right, so just to start in a nutshell, the problems that you all know you face with a startup. You've got a good business plan, you've got a good strategy, you've done your market research, but the problem always comes in implementation. And fortunately or unfortunately, in some people's views, whether you belong to the manager X or manager Y management element, according to the industrial psychological studies, you need to now put your management team together and your staff that are going to drive your business. And unless you're in a really highly automated business that needs minimal staff, which case a lot of people might be very jealous of, this is going to generally be your highest cost element for the life of your business. And in order to get that strategy implemented, you really need to attract the right staff and management. And this is a theme I've seen over and over and over, and this is not a South African theme. It's an international theme. I've seen it. I'm doing work with 2 large family-owned businesses, multi-million-dollar enterprises in the Middle East at the moment, where I see the same issues that I've seen in entrepreneurial companies in other parts of the world, where at the beginning, when entrepreneurs start something, they know what to do with all areas of their business. They're the ones that started the business. They're the ones that lead to most of the growth in the beginning. But after a while, that monster just becomes too big, and you need other people to run parts of it for you if it is proving to be as successful as you hoped. And it's at that point always that the problem comes in terms of having the control in the beginning and then having a plan for handing over control. And getting other people on board that have the same vision and the same knowledge and the same work ethic that you do to actually make that business grow even more, because there are only so many hours in a day and only so many things that one person or 2 people running a company originally can do. So you now need to attract the right staff and management. And that's easier said than done, because what startups often realize is that they then have to attract many staff and management from companies, from established companies, and they have to draw them over. And these people are working in established companies with high salary levels and benefits, which you can't really afford. So how do you structure a compensation package that will lure them over? Some of them will be lured over purely by being able to be within a startup, as opposed to the very stilted atmosphere or environment of a mature company. But compensation still plays a very, very big part. And there's a whole lot of questions as to how much you can afford, how much cash is reasonable. A lot of entrepreneurial companies, and we've seen this started with the so-called unicorns in the IT sector, start with cash, with share offerings. So do we offer shares in our company, knowing that one day that company might grow very large? So the original workers who joined a Facebook or a Google or a Microsoft or even an Amazon have shares today that are significantly worth more than they did in the beginning. But when you allocate those shares, there's also a lot of companies that have been burnt, as we'll show later. So should there be shares, and how much do you allocate? If you come to benefits, how do you match a traditional benefits package? What can you do around that? So in short, it really comes to what kind of compensation and benefits program can you afford that will get you the right people but not break your business? Because we all know in the beginning, cash flow is absolutely vital. And a lot of companies close not due to being successful, but due to bad cash flow. So selecting appropriate compensation and benefits policies from the start is a critical challenge. And the challenge is really great when the company first takes shape, because a lot of bad decisions are taken in the beginning. which then become legacy decisions. And what we find is as you move up the business maturity curve, as we'll get onto in a few minutes' time, as you move up that curve, the bad decisions that you made previously come back and bite you. Because bad decisions in a very small organization, which comprises, let's say, less than 20 people, where everybody knows their place, everybody knows what to do, everybody knows what their role is, and everybody's really grabbed by this challenge of growing the business. The whole business and the culture becomes different the bigger the company gets, and the more the company moves up that maturity curve, and the challenges just become bigger. So there's that delicate balance. You've got low levels of cash in the beginning, you've got low turnover, so how do you work with lower levels of cash compensation? But if you offer people too much, you threaten your own business model and your own cash flow. So how do you proceed? Just a warning and a spoiler, much like you would get if you used to be a Game of Thrones viewer. There is no magic silver bullet. The lessons that we'd like to provide and the guidance that we'd like to provide in this session comes from many projects over the years, which have shown what is better and what is worse. But at the end of the day, I must just stress before we move on that there's no silver bullet that you can apply to all small companies. If there were, I think consulting companies would have made millions more than they have by now. It's a case of each company is an individual with a culture and a personality, much like we are all individuals, and we each have our own personality as well. So what works for one startup might not work for another startup. But what we would like to do is give you, as a consultant over many years, I've become a bit allergic to the term best practice, because that denotes that there is a single best practice in a hugely diverse international market, which often isn't the case. But what I'd like to perhaps refer to it as is common practice, and common being linked to common sense. And the common practice means that it's best common sense to apply that, and it has been shown in most instances to have the best results. So this is just to give you a bit of context as to where the talk is coming from and how we will be proceeding with that. Right, moving on.
Perfect. Thanks, Sean. I must underline and agree with you. I hate the term best practice. I cannot stand it. There is no such thing. There's market practice and best fit. So I completely agree with you. But having said that, there are certain fundamentals and building blocks that go into any setup of a remuneration or a reward structure. So I'd just like to go through a couple of slides here that just really contextualize what remuneration and reward is in our world and how we've seen it change. Sean and I have both been in this game for north of 2 decades, and it has changed significantly in that time. So when we talk remuneration, we're talking rands and cents, but each basket of remuneration, it has got a different driver. So fixed pay, we like to call it total guaranteed package. In South Africa, often called total cost to company as well. Those are the fixed monthly costs that are paid to an employee. So in other words, what that employee costs an organization on a fixed basis in a calendar year. Some companies are still using this basic salary plus benefits or the add-on approach. We find it's far more common overseas. In South Africa, depending on which study you read, we're sitting at about 75-80% of organizations who have gone on to total cost to company, particularly outside of bargaining unit. And even when we look at salary surveys, we now look at total guaranteed package, because it's very, very difficult because of that saturation to benchmark on basic salary now. And the reason for that is in a total cost to company or total guaranteed package, that base salary or cash portion becomes a factor of choice. So someone with 6 kids, and a full medical aid, and someone with no kids on a spouse's medical aid, the take-home portions are going to be vastly different, even with the same guaranteed package. So that's why we do that element. Then sort of moving to the top half of this, we're looking at variable pay. Now, variable pay is not a backward-looking Bonsela. It's not a discretionary bonus payment where people are surprised at the end of the year. Or should I say it shouldn't be. We certainly do still see that out in the market, but really to get maximum benefit out of your variable pay. And I've just popped into the chat box. Grant asked a very cool question, and Sean's going to address it to a large extent in his business maturity curve, where he talks about using the different elements of pay at different stages in a business maturity curve. And to get maximum benefit out of these variable pay schemes, it's all about driving behavior. So aligning the measures to a corporate strategy and getting the right behaviors out of employees. So the short-term incentive, 12 months or less. You do sometimes see it getting paid monthly. Think commission scheme. Quarterly, think production bonus, and annually is very, very common. Think a performance bonus scheme, but always driving those short-term measures. What the good governance dictates is that we need to separate short and long-term incentive schemes. King 3 was particularly forceful on that, where you cannot measure the short and long-term performance bonus success using the same basket of measures. And the long-term incentive schemes is really about forward-thinking, sustainability, shareholder alignment, and the benefit to you as an organization and for employees on those schemes is it's a great wealth creation mechanism, but really for those people who have either got great line of sight to the performance of the business at a corporate goal level, or those critical skills that you can't afford to lose if you're looking for a retention hook on the long-term side. So moving on to the next picture, and I love this. It's not ours. It's from World at Work, and it has evolved twice since then, but you'll see this is 2007. I prefer this one. I think probably because I've been talking to it for so many years. And what I really like about it is it introduces the concept of total reward for the first time. So we used to put remuneration policies in place. Now it's all about total rewards, which is far broader than remuneration. So if we look pure remuneration, it's about sizing the job, making sure that your internal equity is correct, and we're going to touch on that through the course of the morning, and looking at your external equity. So making sure that you are living your philosophical pay point relative to the market, and that's really where the focus on remuneration starts and ends. But total reward takes it a few steps further and starts looking at things like work-life balance, performance and recognition, and very importantly, development and career opportunities linked to competence in the organization. And in the beginning, I mentioned that 21st century is an entrepreneurial space. And organizational culture is so super critical to us. And I really urge everyone who's in that kind of environment to let that lead your decisions. Hire for culture, make decisions for culture, put strategy in place for culture. It's the most important element for me of why I jump out of bed every morning. And, it's what's really cool in our environment is that our CEO and chairman are the two who started the business. So we've really been able to keep that feel through the business, because a lot of times we get asked the question, as soon as we put policies in place, or as soon as we put job evaluation in place, or structure around pay scales, we're going to lose that entrepreneurial flair. And I would urge you to reframe your thinking slightly, because these things can happen in the background and should happen in the background. And Sean's got another really neat slide to tell in this presentation that looks at the cost of getting it wrong. So it doesn't mean that you need to put a ton of rules in place by putting more structure into how you manage your remuneration and reward. And that's pretty key. And sort of the last slide in building up this total reward picture is one step further, and it's called employee value proposition. And it's really what you can offer employees in terms of, and this is really bespoke to your business, where remuneration just becomes one pillar and essentially becomes a hygiene factor, but it's an important hygiene factor. It's what we call the ticket to the game. If you don't get it right, you can forget about playing the employee value proposition game. I'm gonna say it again because it's critically important. If you don't get remuneration right, you can forget about everything else in the business that makes it a cool place to work. You know, work-life balance, work from home, career progression, access to leadership, all those cool things that make it exciting and vibrant and dynamic to work in this space are almost nullified if you don't get remuneration correct. Sean, do you want to take the next couple of slides?
Sorry, I just had my connection issues there. I switched over to another network, so hopefully they will be over now. So what we really want to do with people is, as Craig has said, really three questions. If you're looking at the pay, as Craig said, the ticket to the game. What do we want to pay people for? What's the focus of our reward? And we have to be very clear here, and I'll just explain this in a bit more detail in another slide to come, which shows what benefit we get from the components of what we pay for. So the first thing we want to know is, what do we want to pay people for? Now, this comes around to the role of that the person plays within the company. The way you want to incentivize, let's say, and I'm going to use a very simple job here, a debtors clerk, is very different to the way you want to incentivize a salesperson. The salespeople, by nature of their personalities and their competencies and their interests, are very different. And the successful salespeople are driven by success and being rewarded for success. So to pay a salesperson a large base salary is almost self-defeating. There, your focus of reward is more on incentives. The better you do, the better the company does, the better the sales do, the better you do. So it's very important to get that focus correct. Whereas somebody who's in an administrative position, and let's be honest, yeah, quite a few people aren't in administrative positions because they'd like to be, but because that's where they've ended up in search for a job. But in many instances, their focus is more on stability and the base salary and rewarding them for what they're doing every day from an administrative point of view. So it's very important with the first question to really know what the focus is of what you're paying for. Be very clear about that. The second question that you should ask is, what form should you pay? And here's where we get to a very, very, very important concept called the reward mix. And it's very important to get that reward mix right. So going back to the example I used earlier, if you take a salesperson, I've dealt with a lot of companies who believe in paying their salespeople nothing on a monthly basis if one considers a base salary, and really putting everything into commission and how much you make. But what I've seen in a lot of instances is that, in a way, this creates a situation of almost permanent instability for the salespeople, in that they have nothing to fall back on each month, or know at least that some of their basic needs are being met by some form of base salary, which then frees them up to actually earn more and place more emphasis on growing the sales. So the reward mix plays a very important role in getting that right, and saying to the individual or to the staff member, this part of your needs we are meeting, and this part of your needs we are meeting, so that you can be okay in knowing that some of your costs are met on a monthly basis, but you're not going to make more money and really shoot the lights out in terms of how you want to shoot the lights out for your own finances if you don't get out there and sell a lot. As opposed to saying you're getting nothing, and if you make no sales this month, you are getting nothing from the company. Where the former might get you better sales, while the latter will really, in a lot of people, just create such anxiety that they actually almost freeze and don't pay as much attention as they should to increasing sales. So getting that reward mix right is vital. And really, this is where you have to talk about the mix between the salary, between the bonus, whichever form it takes, be that commission or all the bonus types that Craig just went through. Do you pay teams based on their performance, which quite honestly is not a perfect science? And unless you've got a really close-knit team with very much the same competencies and profiles, you are going to struggle to really pay on a team-based pay basis, because it invariably results in some members of the team turning around and saying, we've done everything, while some members of the team have done precious little. Do we give company profit share? And if we're giving company profit share, who do we give it to? And in a lot of instances, we find companies saying, well, the operational people are where the money is. That's where the money's coming from. That's who we must pay. The salespeople are making the sales. They're causing the money to come in. We need to give them what we need to give them. So that's where we will share the company's profit. But as a company grows, we often forget the vital role that the support staff play, and that your support functions play, where, if you don't have a good HR department sorting out people's problems, and dealing with all the people-based problems that arise, or we don't have a good, we don't have a good finance division that is actually processing our invoices, our payments, making sure everything is collected, etc., to totally neglect that element of the business in any form of company profit share would also be self-defeating. What part of the package do we get benefits on? Over the many years, a style of thinking came out called the cafeteria approach to salaries, where studies showed that a lot of people would rather take the cash and give themselves their own benefits. So they'd rather say, instead of the company coming to them and saying, here's a pension, here's a medical aid, here's this, here's that, they would rather say, give me that as a cash portion, and I'll go around to the Liberties and Mutuals and Sanlams of the world, and I'll find my best policy. And, from there, I would rather pay for my own benefits and get my own advantage from that. What we found over the years is that people are strange, as I'm sure you all know, employing them, in that cafeteria model was popular for approximately seven to 10 years. And then what we found is that most people are inherently lazy, as we all know, and actually prefer getting offered something rather than going out and looking for it themselves. And in many instances, what happens is that they rather take their cash portion, and especially if they are in the younger generation, they just take the cash and blow it and don't actually invest in a medical aid or a pension or these things that will become more important the older they get. So we found really a swing back to people saying, well, I actually place value on a company that says to me, look, we've got a really good medical aid. And we've seen it in this country, especially where our public healthcare system is so bad. The benefits of offering a really strong medical aid or a pension fund that offers really strong benefits related to, let's say, parts of dread disease or incapacitation. Those benefits can really come to the fore and swing employees. I must just make one last point here, that the benefits depends a lot on which demographic your employees come from, and this relates to age. So it's a whole different discussion on its own, but there are different, your different age brackets, your baby boomers, your Generation X, your Generation Y. As people get older, there's things that they place different emphasis on, and things that become more important to them. And the last point we make here is the non-financial rewards. And these are things that we find many times companies sadly underestimate. And a non-financial reward example begins with something as simple as thank you, or something as simple as that was a job well done, recognition, just recognizing people's input. Other non-financial rewards include things like dinners, gift vouchers, things that don't actually have a cash value to them. For years, a lot of the big multinationals have used things like staff member of the month, employee of the month, team member of the month, team member of the week. Things like that all fall into the stable that we refer to as non-financial rewards. And what we found over the years is that the stable gets bigger and bigger as what we call the psychology of reward becomes clearer to us. So I'll give you a cultural example here. For a lot of multinationals, if you go to, let's say, an FMCG company that sells a product to its clients, to its retail clients, be that groceries like a Procter & Gamble or a Unilever, where you have the representative actually visiting those clients. In some countries, and we find this most prevalent in the Middle East, if you call that person a manager, if you give them a manager title, that is a huge bonus to them. It provides a level and a status to their position, which in other countries we just wouldn't understand. So they wouldn't actually get into a client's organization with a title like representative or sales executive. If they are called a sales manager or a district manager or something to that effect, purely that title adds something to them. And what we've seen is people moving from one company to another for a very, very, very small increase in actual pay, but more related to something like a title change, which almost denotes a status change in their lives. And that would also be grouped in what we refer to as non-financial rewards. These are the things that you can do that don't actually involve giving out too much, if any, cash to the employees. And that's become a very important part of what we look at, going back to what Craig called the total reward package. The last point I wanted to make on this slide is quite important for what we've got going forward and when we're looking at the business maturity curve. And that's the last question that we're dealing with here, which is how much should we pay? What level? And this is where we get to the intricacies and mysteries of what we call market pay. There's a couple of ways to get your market pay, and there's a couple of ways to look at what the market pays. The first is to listen to employees who come running in saying, I've been offered a job by X and they've offered me more than you pay me. And thinking that the offer that competitor has made to them represents the market. Please don't be fooled, it doesn't. It's an isolated incident. What we found over and over again is that if a company has a need for a certain individual in a certain position, and they feel they really want that individual in that position, they will offer them a special salary to get them in. And that is not indicative of market. What your friends might tell you on the golf course on a Saturday or a Sunday as to what they pay their people, that's not indicative of market either. So it begs the question at the end of the day, how do we know what market pay is? And the only way we've been able to really solve this over the years is that we have a number of companies, such as ourselves, that do offer what we call market surveys. And the principle of the market survey is simple. A company takes part in the market survey. They submit their data to the company who is running the market survey. There's all kinds of confidentiality agreements with that. The company then has the market survey, collects all the data from the people who have subscribed. It's based on a subscription base. And then they take that data, put it together, and I'm taking a very basic example here. If we take an engineer, the survey will then come back and say, within the market, the typical pay for an engineer is 40,000 a month. And then the market survey will go further and will also tell you what the average bonus for an engineer is and what the average benefits package for an engineer is. It takes all that data, puts it together, and then reports it back to the subscribers so that they have an idea of what the market is paying. Once again, it's not a perfect science. So very often we've had people coming to us saying, I've had a CEO saying, but I know you say this is the market pay, but I know that competitor of ours is paying X. Yes, that competitor might be paying X. That competitor might not be a participant in that particular market survey. There might be 100 companies in that market survey, but that competitor is not one of them. And the fact that the market is paying X is not a guarantee that all the companies are paying X. This is just the most statistically and sound way of confidentially reporting back on what markets pay, which is better than the absence of information completely. And it's better than nothing. So when we talk about these salary surveys, please just remember that they are not a perfect science. They do represent the population that subscribes to them, but they do give us a picture that is clearer than if we had to work with employees coming in with offers from other companies, or what our feedback is. Or even if we scour the job market and try to find the salaries in terms of advertisements for jobs, because very often they start low and will go higher as there's negotiations, or they start at a top level, but then they will negotiate lower as the candidate doesn't have the right experience or qualifications mix, etc. So the points about the market survey that I just need everybody to understand is, when we get a market survey in and we give the results out to the market, we really have 5 market points that we talk about. The most common market point we talk about is median, which is the 50th percentile of the market. That means half of the companies in that sample pay at that element. And that is what most companies look at these days. They look at what does half the market pay? What is the 50th percentile of the market? That is the term we use, percentile. We then look at the upper quartile, which is what we call the 75th percentile. In times gone past, before the financial crisis and specifically before the whole pandemic, we found that a lot of very big companies and blue chips would want to position their reward package at the upper quartile. They wanted to be known in market as a very good payer. And that's where they positioned. My experience over the last 5 to 6 years, or 8 years since the last economic crash, has really been that companies have moved to the median in order to get more of a handle on staff costs. They use the upper quartile to pay bonuses. So if the performance is exceptional, the returns are at upper quartile level, which is exceptional. Top of the market is the 90th percentile. It's the top 10% paying companies. We don't find too much emphasis or interest there anymore. It's just too expensive to position yourself up there. You then drop to the lower ones, which is the lower quartile and bottom of the market. The lower quartile is really your bottom 25% of companies. That's what the lowest payers pay. And then you get right at the bottom, which is the 10th percentile. And that is just the very, very, very low payers within that specific market. The people want to know if they're at the lower quartile, because if it's a bigger, more established company, they might be losing people to companies that pay at the median. And that might cause them to want to adjust a component of the reward mix to see where they're lagging the market and where they might be at risk. So this is just a very quick overview of how we look at market surveys, what those market surveys give back to us, and the information they deliver to us, because we will be using these in some of the slides going forward. Right, moving on to the next slide.
Sean, as we transition to this next slide, our chairman talks a lot at conferences, and I've heard him say time and time again, if you walk away from any conference talk or engagement with one idea, then it's been worthwhile. And I can tell you this next slide is a new slide for me. Sean only showed it to me a couple of days ago, and this is your slide. It's quite incredible. No pressure, Sean.
No, thanks, Craig. So this is a very, very interesting study that was run many years ago by, you would have heard Craig refer earlier to World at Work. World at Work is basically the International Reward Association, if one can call it that. So it's the International Association of Reward Professionals, who do a lot of work with associated universities. So one of the universities, for instance, that was involved in this reward, in this particular project, was Loyola University in Chicago, which when I was still with Hay Group, we used to do a lot of work with as well. And what the study did was it combined studies from all over the world and said, what is the perceived benefit of what you offer to employees from their point of view? So we know what the cost basis is of that reward element to you as a company, but how do your employees perceive the value of that element? And the results were, as Craig saw the other day, the results were quite interesting. So if you look at the inner circle, if I can just explain this infographic to you very quickly, this 70 you see here, the blue, that represents the base pay. That's the basic pay. That's what you pay your employee to show up in the morning and do their work. That's the main element of the pay. And in most instances, it represents, if you're not a sales-based position, it represents approximately 70% of your total package. But the perceived value to the employee of that base salary is only 10%. And the reason for that is that's what they expect. They expect their base salary. When you hire them, they're very excited at the fact maybe that their base salary has gone up from 10,000 at the previous employer to 15,000 with you. But after 6 to 7 to 8 months, they start treating that base as what they are owed. It's their right. It's their right under labor law, it's their right under the employment contract, and it's their right under their contract of the employment contract they have with the employer. So the value of that base pay to them is only 10% of the whole. If you then move to the next element of the reward mix and total reward package, which is your benefits, that's your pension, your medical aid, there might be a car allowance in there, etc. That generally represents about 15% of packages. And this is really, I must just stress, a wide generalization here for purposes of the study. But in terms of the perceived benefit to the employee, that's double. Going back to what I said earlier about what we found that employees appreciate a company that can offer them a strong benefits package, that can offer them a good medical aid, that offers, let's say, educational assistance or car packages or better financial products due to being in a better position to negotiate with banks as to lower rates. These things, from a cost point of view, is worth double. So it's a 15% employment cost, but it's a 30% perceived employee value. You then move on to your incentives, which is your bonuses. And while this figure rises the higher up an organization you go, and it can really be very different if your role is a sales or production-based role, it's around about 10% is the incentive, but it's 3 times the value. Again, 30% perceived value to the employee. So they really appreciate that end of financial year bonus that they receive to them, it represents good value in terms of the employment cost. And then the last point is the intangibles. And this is what I was getting back to, and what I was referring to earlier as the non-cash measures. The intangibles like awards, recognition, career development, training opportunities, maybe if there's been good performance. These type of intangibles normally represent around about a 5%, because one can take quite a few of them and put a cash value onto it. You can put a cost value onto it. Represent about 5%, but they have a perceived value to the employee of 6 times that amount. So I hope this slide provides a little bit of a background to the psychology of reward, in that, you know, very often we might make our increases. Every year we get to increases and we think we just have to increase the base pay. So we might increase the base pay and the cost to our company, but the perceived value to our staff is very small on that increase in base pay. Whereas if we came in with something and said we're increasing base pay purely by CPI, by inflation, but we're going to focus in the new year on higher incentives. If targets are met that finance those incentives, the perceived value might be higher to the employee. Right. So moving on to the business maturity curve that we spoke about earlier. And this is where all the concepts that I've taken a bit of your time to explain come in. If you go on your traditional business curve from a startup, a high growth company, a company that then becomes mature, and a company that then has gone from still mature, but it's in more of a decline, lower growth rates, more of a plateau. There are different profiles on this business maturity curve for different companies. So if we look where most companies start, where most of you have your companies, your startup fast growth, we know the companies may be highly leveraged, or that it doesn't have it doesn't have the cash flows that it would like to. We find that a lot of startups place a heavy emphasis on variable pay, and that's your short-term incentive, which is your annual, or your LTI, which is a longer term, generally a 3 to 5 year plan. That's your share-based schemes, your cash schemes. We'll get into a little bit more detail there later, so don't worry about that. We find that companies at the startup level are your lower base salary. They generally are sometimes lucky to actually be on the 50th, and they're generally between the 25th and the 50th of the market. They tend to position themselves lower on the base salary portion, and they give more emphasis to bonuses. There's a very simple reason for that. If you give a higher base salary, you are stuck in that every month in terms of our labor legislation. If you've promised someone 10,000 a month, that's what you're in for. And to actually lower that is either Section 189 retrenchment, rearrangement. We all know how expensive and how complicated that can be. Whereas if you do a correct incentive plan, emphasis on the correct, the incentive plan should be self-funding, which means if you make the profits, there is a bonus pool that is then funded, and you can then pay those higher incentives. If you don't make the targets, you don't place yourselves at that risk in the same way that you do with a guaranteed base pay. So that is why the startups have a very low emphasis on base pay. It generally is, don't try and compete with the big boys, because you get. So the better you do, the more you get. And the better you do, the company's funded, which means that particular bonus pool is funded as well. As companies move up the maturity curve, we find that as the workforce grows and the growth grows, and we find the company becoming larger, that they do tend to then move towards median base salaries, because a lot of the talent at this area of the growth curve is coming from the mature companies. We want to get people in if we're trying to grow a competitor to Discovery, goodness help you, we would like some talent from Discovery to help us, as an example, to get there. So we find this, the base salaries moving more towards the market median. There are still very competitive incentives. The incentive model stays the same. We are funding our bonus pool.
Sorry to interrupt.
So,
Maybe
but whereas if we had to put all the elements together, we'd probably find ourselves slightly below median.
Good morning. How's it? How are you?
Sorry, Sean. I was going to suggest that you turn your camera off because we're losing your signal a bit.
Okay, there we go. Is that better for everyone? Can you hear me?
So far, so good. Thank you.
Okay. The picture's much better to look at anyway. So what we do is we move from the median base salaries, where the startup, where if we put everything together, we're sort of sitting at just below market. We've got low base salary, we've got higher incentives. When we start to move up the growth curve, we start to move into the middle of the market. Yeah, we're generally paying people on the median with base salaries, or just below the median, and we're paying them higher in terms of profit share and bonuses. When we get into the mature, capital intensive, profitable area, we find here that the companies start moving into high base salaries. We're an MTN, we're a Vodacom, we're a Standard Bank, whatever the case may be, we're a Discovery. We want to attract people, and part of our attraction is we offer you a good salary because we can afford to. So we find that the base salaries are really above median. We find that the benefits are above median as well, because it's the large companies that can really put into place their buying power and offer group life, group pension, good medical aid. They can offer things like childcare facilities. They can offer staff purchasing benefits, staff discounts, all of those points. So the base and the benefits package is very strong. And what you will find is that the incentives are generally in the midpoint of the market as well. So where at the bottom of the curve, the variable pay, the pay that is at risk, we like to call it the at risk pay, it's not guaranteed. The bonus portion is bigger for the startups and the high growth. At the top and at the mature decline, where it's pretty much the same, the guaranteed portion of the package, being the basic salary and the benefits, they are larger, and the bonuses are probably more at market median levels. So that's really the mix between the companies on the way up the curve. You cannot pay large basic salaries when you're a startup. It's an unfortunate fact of economic life. So you need to do everything in your power to check what it is you want to make sure that your bonus pool funds that. And if you make those amounts, you've then got the money to pay those good bonuses. And we find that people are generally happy with that. If they make up for what they perceive to be a lower base pay with the fact that they've been paid higher bonuses on achievement of targets. So I hope this puts the business curve into a little bit of perspective as to how common market practice works. Right, moving on.
Perfect. Thanks, Sean. Grant, I hope that goes some of the way to answering your question, but we do touch on other elements as we go through the case studies. Just before we get to the first case study, I'd just like to answer Andrew's and Frin, I hope I pronounced that correctly, a question on small headcounts. And I love dealing with organizations with small headcounts. I just feel the value add is so much greater, which gives us satisfaction as consultants. And this career pathing question is one that comes up time and time again. And we've been running engagement or EVP surveys for many, many years. And I can tell you that career pathing is always in the top 3. And I would have a guess at 70% of the time, it is the biggest engagement driver when looking at a total reward approach. And it's a question we often get asked is we've got a small head count or we've got a flat structure. We're not like one of the big retail banks where there's a ladder, where you can go from intern to junior salesperson to salesperson to senior salesperson to super extra special senior salesperson to manager. And we've got a very similar problem at 21st Century. But the one element I want to just highlight is that career pathing doesn't need to equal promotion. So there doesn't need to be a defined journey through an organization based on the attainment of competencies. And rather in a smaller organization, what we encourage clients to do is to reframe the language and the thinking from career pathing to career development. And there's nothing stopping you from developing a person in an organization. It can be linked to increased pay. It certainly can be linked to increased responsibilities. And yes, you are developing that employee's CV, and you are making them more marketable in the market, and that's okay. In fact, that's important, and we always like to encourage that. When we're looking at retention, there are other things that you can look at to retain employees, like long-term incentive schemes or rolling the payments of something to have that retention hook. But don't make lack of development your retention hook, because there's a nervousness that person is going to get poached. So I think the takeaway for me is focus on career development and absolutely develop that employee's career and their learning, even within your organization.
Right. I see we've got an interesting question from Barry in terms of when to pay incentives. I mean, is there a specific timing in terms of monthly, quarterly? Is it related to seasonal industry like tourism and events? So the question is in the chat, and Barry, I don't know if you want to expand on that.
Hi, thanks. Thanks, Ed. Yeah, just as I said in the chat, we find that when running incentives, if we don't have them quite close to the effort, so to reach a sales figure in that month or within that quarter, the motivation wanes radically. And then the second part of the question is, when we are faced with paying them, it's often at the beginning of the winter months when we've had a very busy season and we don't know what the future holds. Never more apt than right now. But so we're often having to fork out cash for efforts done, but we're exposing ourselves with cash flow issues going into the coming months. So I just appreciate any input on that.
Perfect. A very fantastic question. And I tell you that the most difficult incentive schemes that we design are not executive incentive schemes. They are sales commission type schemes, because they are very easy to game, and as you said, rewarding soon after the effort is incredibly important when you're trying to drive that kind of behavior. But that seasonality is a critical element there, and we see it particularly in quarterly incentives, which work very well in a production kind of environment. But the problem comes in where you absolutely walk on water, shoot the lights out in quarter one, and then tank it for the rest of the year, and you've paid out too much money. So the trick that we found over the years is that there's a way to smooth those payments. So you hold a certain amount back, and that looks at measuring over the full term. So yes, you do reward on those shorter pay events, but don't pay all of the money out. Have some sort of mechanism that allows you to bank some of the incentive, and then you either pay it out as a as a once-off bonus at the end, or you smooth it out over the payment period. So typically, as a rule of thumb, the more senior you are in an organization, that annual type approach works best, because your performance horizons are typically longer and more strategic in nature. And the more junior you are in an organization, the more you're driven by daily, weekly, or monthly targets, particularly in that sales environment. So it really does depend on the type of incentive, and also, Barry, what we see in organizations is that multiple incentive schemes are run. You might have an executive incentive scheme, you might have a production bonus scheme, and you might have a sales commission scheme paying out monthly, quarterly, and annually. So there's nothing wrong with having that mix in the organization either.
Great, thanks.
Cool. So on to the first case study. We thought we'd get through the first one and then have a quick comfort break. So if I just read it to you guys. Initially, a new company in the security industry employs 20 staff members. All staff are paid according to what they earn at their previous companies, and salaries are confidential. As the staff complement grows to 65, details begin emerging about the wildly different pay levels of staff doing the same job. There are no set pay scales or job levels. Soon, a case is lodged by some of your guards with the CCMA concerning equal pay for work of equal value. In the absence of any established scales or levels, all effective staff are lifted to the pay level of the highest paid staff member, raising your staff costs to 32%. Sean, can I hand over to you on this one? A very, very common problem that we see in the market.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Craig. I'm just going to keep my video off for the moment, just to keep my audio good. So this is a typical problem. You know, when you bring people together, you've got 20 staff members or less. It's easy to say you're earning this, you're earning that. You don't have pay grades, you don't have levels, you don't have all of this nonsense to deal with. Let's say a mining company with 1,800 people has to deal with. But you have to know that if your company is successful, it will grow. And as you grow, you will add staff members. And very soon you will start finding that you've got people who come from, you might not have a union in your company, but you will employ people who come from unionized backgrounds, who know the story with regard to what we're going to cover in a few slides' time. Our new amendments, not new anymore, they're about 4 years old, but the principle of equal pay for work of equal value, and how people are paid, you're going to start finding yourself exposed to that. And I please want to just kill one urban legend or one commercial legend, one commercial myth right now, and that is the myth of salary confidentiality. It doesn't exist. I know that a lot of employment contracts actually specify salary confidentiality. What a lot of people don't know is that in terms of the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, there is actually no salary confidentiality. You know, you can go to a forum or direct a question to the company and be provided with certain salary levels, not individual salary levels, but grade salary levels, to see how you are lying with regard to that. So what you want to do is, and the point of all these case studies is really to say, you know, don't get to the point where you're sitting with us, where you actually now have neglected your levels. People are still being paid all over the place. As they join, it's a case of, okay, what did you earn? I earned 10,000, right? We'll pay you 14,000. You know, the next person joins. What did you earn? I earned 8,000, right? I'll pay you 10,000. You walk away from that going, wow, you know, that was good. I just got a very good person who I was lucky was being paid less, so I can pay them less. But be assured that in 6 months' time, those people, if they're doing the same job, are going to know what each other earns. And the one person who's now earning 10 versus the other person who's earning 14 is going to say, but we're doing the same job. Why do you earn so much more than I do? What's the rationale behind it? And if you don't have that set of rationales in place, you are going to open yourself to claims. So that's really what the point here is. The other point I just wanted to make before we move on to the solutions is that Craig mentioned earlier internal equity and external equity. External equity is what I spoke about in comparing yourself to market. But what companies often, the bigger they are, the more they start to get absolutely fascinated with what the market pays. And, the first thing a reward professional from a big multinational or a big blue chip listed company will say is, where do we sit in terms of market? What they then often neglect is the internal equity. And the internal equity causes a lot more trouble in your business than what the market pays. You might have a salesperson, you're a startup telecommunications company, you might have a salesperson that knows that the salespeople at Vodacom earn 15% more than he does or she does. And they might like that. And if there's an opening at Vodacom, they'll move over. But what will cause more trouble is when they're sitting with someone in their very office, in the desk next to them, doing the same job at the very same company, who's paid 20% more than them. And they don't know why. That causes a lot more friction and that causes a lot more trouble. So internal equity often causes us, or internal inequity causes us a lot more problems than comparing ourselves to market. So moving on to the solution to this.
Dawn, as I transition to the solution, we want to take a comfort break at as close to 9 o'clock as possible, just so that you keep that in
Got
mind.
it. Okay, so please, from the beginning, what we find is that a lot of people leave it too late to put in things like job grades and pay structures. Because under our labor legislation, even if you think someone like Google famously held out for years on putting job grades and pay structures in place. They wanted to retain that entrepreneurial spirit, as Craig said. And when I was with Hay Group, year after year, all we heard from them was, we don't want to pigeonhole people. But as they grew bigger and bigger and bigger, they just had to put something in place that added more structure. And really, this is all about structure. And I think the most important part here is that you really need to have a grading structure in place, a job evaluation structure in place, which provides, very importantly in that second paragraph, a logical framework. From a legal and risk point of view, it does provide you with a defense in terms of claims for equal pay for work at equal value. But to put them in purely as I need to do this because the law requires it is a bit short-sighted. The larger you grow, the more it's going to start saving you as well. Because in the beginning, when someone said, I earn 14,000, and you say, right, I'll offer you 16 to come over to us. What you might actually be doing is offering them a salary outside of their band. And when you start doing that, you start introducing more and more inequities into your firm. And when you have a structure in place, that will actually start tempering and guiding your recruitment decisions in a more structured way. And that will ultimately save you in costs, because you will turn around at one point, much like you want to buy an expensive item at the end of the month and say, my budget just doesn't allow for this. You will actually turn around and say, I really want this person, but they are going to upset my structure. I'm going to have to pay them outside of the band for that job. And that's just going to cause a lot of problems, and it's going to start putting a lot of cost pressures on everybody else who wants the same salary, and it's going to make them demotivated. So I should actually walk away. So moving on to the next slide. Pay structures is, as the word denotes, all about having structure. And this is where job evaluation comes in. I'm not going to say too much about job evaluation. This is one of the job evaluation systems that's used. It's called Paddison. The idea is to evaluate jobs, because the bigger a company gets, the more difficult it becomes to say who has the bigger job, the technician or the executive secretary. It's very easy to see when we come into a company, it's easy to see the top job, and it's easy to see the most basic operational job. But all the jobs in between can get very, very, very sticky the larger the company gets. So it's really about starting to put those jobs into levels, and then using the job evaluation levels to say, right, we have a pay grade for a B lower set of employees. We now have a pay structure and a pay grade for positions lying in a B upper, a C lower, a C upper, as we move up the levels according to job complexity, qualification, experience. Yes, tenure does play a role. We do expect employees who've been with a company longer to be paid more than people who are starting, but in a lot of instances, that's not the case. So the whole point is to put into place a structure that has job grades attached, because you will need the job grades to be able to rationalize and defend your structure, and then to link them to pay. So moving on to the next slide, which I think is where I want to just spend a few minutes. Not this slide, sorry, the next one. But really the benefits of job evaluation. Job evaluation might seem like a very bad thing to put in, or a very boring thing, but it is the most basic foundation, because the grades will really then point us in the direction of our pay scales. And if you look at this, on the right-hand side is, and sorry, we will get to the questions and answer the questions, very good questions coming in. On the right-hand side, we have what a company traditionally looks like. The little dots represent people you've appointed. And what we find is we go into companies who've never had pay scales before, we put the pay scale together, and on the right-hand side, that dispersion is what it generally looks like. We have a couple of people who aren't even paid at the minimum. We have quite a few round about the middle, and then we have quite a few who are brought in on high salaries because we really wanted them, but they're actually sitting outside of our structured pay scales now. Whereas if we had a really perfect pay scale, the ideal, which almost never happens, but it's something we need to aspire to, we'd have a couple of people with long tenure or high performance sitting at the top of the pay scale. We'd have most of our staff sitting at the midpoint of the pay scale, and then we'd have some people, either new joiners or low performers, really sitting at the bottom. So while I've almost never seen a company in my consulting life fully achieve this picture, what it does provide us with is it provides us with at least something to aim at. Whereas on the right-hand side, we can see that everybody's all over the place. And these people that are here are all in the same grade. So what we're saying is that this person is essentially above the maximum of the pay grade, but is paid probably twice what this person who's below the minimum is paid for essentially the same job. And that's where we run into trouble. How do we defend that to the people involved? And how do we defend that in turn if we get a legal claim against us? So what I just want to make sure that your takeout with this is, it's not your job to read reward graphs, etc., but it's just a case of saying the structure, once we put the pay grades and the pay scales and the job levels in place, it then presents a picture to us which shows us what it is we have to fix, who it is we have to move up into the levels of pay. So we have to do adjustments. Over time, we can do it over time and in a manner that's affordable to us. We don't have to fix it all in 1 year. And then who we have to watch to see that they don't get too far above the pay scales. Because remember, these scales will move up every year with inflationary increases. So once we have this picture, it gives us a clearer picture of who we need to manage and how we need to manage them, either by bringing them into the salary scale and moving them further up the salary scale, or perhaps paying them some cash in a year in lieu of an increase, which gives them something extra, but doesn't raise their basic salary too high above the maximum of that grade. There's various strategies for dealing with this, which I'm not going to get into right now, but it at least then gives you the picture that you need to manage. Going into the last important area, which would be the next slide, is really just to finish off before the break, and we'll take the questions on the case study after the break. On the equal pay for work of equal value, the Labour Relations Act was amended, as was the Employment Equity Act. And Section 27 of the Employment Equity Act makes provision for income differentials, where an employer must take measures to progressively reduce disproportionate income differentials. And they must be able to prove to employees, and if the CCMA and Labour Court get involved in a legal dispute, how and why people are joining differently. So the only way that you can really address this is through job grading and having a proper pay system in place. So moving on to the last slide. you know, what we forget is that equality is not the same as equity. We really need to say who is paid in a level for doing the same job and why there is a 30% income differential between salesperson A and salesperson B. If we can turn back and say our commission scheme is based purely on performance, hence salesperson A had much higher sales than salesperson B, therefore they got more commission, that's defensible. But we really have to start getting a handle on, do we have outliers? And the outliers were what I showed you earlier, the people falling below the scale and the people falling above the scale, and the people really who've got huge differentials. We have to know our reasons for the outliers and how do we handle the outliers. There can be reasons for outliers. Somebody can be high on a scale because they've been with the company for a long time and tenure is accepted by the courts as a defense and the CCMA, or the person can be at a higher rate of pay because we reward qualifications. So if you get an additional qualification, your pay grade does move up, which means you earn a little bit more than your colleagues because of the higher qualification. But the point to make before we go into our comfort break is that you need to know what that story is. There needs to be a story, there needs to be rules and points to the story, and you need to know for that what that story is. And to move from a startup where we're just glad to have the people, we're paying them, they come to work for us and we pay them at the end of every month, and we're moving forward like that, to then actually putting a structure and a pay grade and a pay scale in place, that is really the big solution here. Is before it's forced on you, and before a court or a CCMA order says you need to increase these 7 employees' pay by 25% to get them at the same level as the highest earning one, because you have no defense, you would rather be in a position to say, we are now at the point where we need the structure. Let's do it by our rules and on our time and according to our needs, rather than something that is pushed upon us by reason of legal risk. And that's really the point that we want to make here. Right, I think we're right on time for our comfort break.
Thank you so much, Sean. Laurie, if I can ask you to please run a timer. I think we're going to take a 5-minute comfort break if everyone's comfortable with that. So back at 9:06. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you feel refreshed after that break and have your questions ready for Sean and Craig. I'm going to hand straight back over to Sean and Craig. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, team. We are going to dive straight into the next case study, because I can see there's a lot of questions and interest. So we're going to try and keep these case studies to sort of 15 minutes to allow us to gauge. Great engagement going on here. So we're very excited about that. The second case study, equal versus fair. The 4 partners of a new business that manufactures fiberglass decide to pay themselves all the same salary and bonuses. They judge their input to be the same. Over a stretch of 6 years of good growth, 2 of the partners take over the biggest 2 sections of the business, while 1 partner withdraws and becomes silent. Other senior managers are also appointed who earn less than the 4th partner, but have much bigger divisions. The partners all still draw their full salaries and bonuses each year, with the other senior managers getting lower bonuses. This soon leads to infighting and tension between the partners themselves and the other senior managers. The business has no policies or structure related to executive pay and bonus approach. Bonuses are awarded on a discretionary basis. 2 of the senior managers who are responsible for new business growth leave for competitors. I cannot tell you how often we see case studies like this. Over to you, Sean, for the solutions.
Thanks, Craig. I'm going to try my video again. I hopefully should have settled on my bandwidth now. If it doesn't, please let me know and I'll switch it off. Yes, the point here is that, you know, it's very easy to make certain rules when we start, and the more we move on, the more the business grows. things change. And if we don't have policies and procedures and structure early on, we are going to run into problems further down the line where external people come into the business, and goodness knows we need those external people. And in many instances, those external people are what we refer to as the rainmakers. They're the ones that bring the business in. They know they bring the business in. They know they're good at bringing business in. And if you're good at bringing business in, you won't find it hard to move. That's what we see with sales positions for good salespeople and good managers, good sales managers. We're looking at turnover rates of around about 30% within that industry, compared to much lower turnover rates in other parts. If you are a good rainmaker and you can bring business in, you are in demand. So the point here is, and the solution is, rather have something around a well-designed bonus scheme in place early on. Don't leave it to chance. Don't leave it to hit a situation like this. Because over time, more senior people who are not partners or shareholders are going to get access to information and are going to know what is going on. And the point is, sorry, just to answer this very quick question, can a restraint of trade prevent them? No. The restraint of trade, as decided by our courts, can only apply to exchanging IP, which is confidential, or to stealing clients from the competitor. So you can't stop somebody from actually doing what they do within the same industry. The only thing a restraint of trade can help you with really is to say that they're not allowed to approach your clients. So moving on to the solution for this, to the next slide, what we really want to do is we want to have something in place from the start, and we want to have the right model in place. And I'm not going to go into detail here. You can do profit sharing, you can do gain sharing, improvement sharing. There's a risk sharing on target earnings where you don't place yourself at risk, as the point has been made in so many questions that have come through. We're going to now place ourselves at risk for paying out bonuses. A good bonus scheme should fund itself. And that goes for a bonus and a commission scheme. A really well-designed bonus scheme and a well-thought-out bonus scheme with, as Craig said earlier, some deferred elements that make up for the lean times. As long as it's clearly communicated and as long as everybody understands what the rules of the game are and what people will get at what level. Our studies over the years have generally found that people are not unhappy with that. So people are not unhappy with a business saying to them, we're not going to pay you the full bonus now. We're going to pay you 60%, but we're putting 40% aside because we're in a tough economic time. At the end of this period, we will get to a point where we will assess our finances. And if the finances are good, we will then pay you the remaining 40%. As long as that's clearly communicated and as long as what you've undertaken to do, you actually do, you will not find staff being opposed to that, as long as they understand it. Our studies over the years have shown that the huge differentiator here is communication and follow through. Understanding communication and follow through is what's really required. You then have your various long-term incentives which come into play as well. And this is a big question as well. How do we offer shares? What do we offer? What do we work with? We'll answer that in the next case study. But the point is really to move on to the next slide, to get your bonus scheme right. And once again, you can get market information from salary surveys about what bonus schemes are paid at what level. And there are different, to go back to Craig's point earlier, there are different bonuses paid at different levels. To repeat what Craig said, we find people higher up the organization at a different level, qualifications, and playing more of a strategic role, they tend to prefer annual payments. We find that people closer to production, closer to sales, and the further down the level they go, between the bottom of middle management and then general staff, they prefer the monthly, quarterly, closer to the action type bonus schemes. And your bonus schemes should really be very carefully designed so that they link. That you're not sitting with a point where your top management are getting bonus schemes based on achievements or targets that are not related to how middle management and general staff. They should all have line of sight, what we call line of sight, and they should really connect to each other so that they all support each other and they're legs of the same model. The second point to make here is, please, if you're putting a bonus scheme in place, please make it achievable. I've worked with too many companies where the board, if it's a large company, comes back and says, you need to make X amount of sales by the end of the year, because we really need it this year. The companies never come close to making X amount of sales, and okay, so the point here is that to please make sure that your bonus targets are achievable, that you can make them stretch, you can make them, really, you can make them high, but just make sure that the key word is achievable. Because if you introduce a bonus scheme that's not achievable and that everybody in the company knows is not achievable, you're wasting a lot of time and money on something that is not going to actually have any impact. So what we really want to do is, if we want people to earn the bonus, we want them to be aware that they can earn the bonus if they put the right effort in. And what our studies have found over the years is that there's around about a 3-month period in which people judge whether a bonus is achievable or not. If they see within 3 months that they are not going to come anywhere near achieving that bonus, they will write that bonus off as part of their package. So they will effectively stop. They will not even factor it into their own financial management. So whereas the beginning of the year with an achievable bonus, gee whiz, I can maybe afford that bigger car for the family at the end of the year. If the bonus target then comes out and the person says, no, there's no way I'm going to make that, they are going to write that bigger car for the family right out of their plans, and they're actually just going to carry on doing what they normally do in a given day. And that means that the bonus is not achieving what it's meant to achieve. If we go on to the final slide, I think it's the final slide for this, you can see here that, this is just giving you a rough indication of general market levels. It differs from industry to industry. But what we basically find is that people at the lower level, your basic skills, that's your cleaners and the type, they get around about 8.3% of their salary, which is essentially a 13th check. And then the higher you move up, operational clerks moves up to 10%. When you start to get to your supervisors and specialists, it could be between 30 and 50% for reps, but around about 15% of your total package would be your bonus. Middle management, senior management, and top management, you can see that the bonus figures start rising exponentially. So what we're really saying to top management is we want to incentivize you to make sure the company achieves its targets. And up to 70%, your package, your bonus can represent up to 70% of your total package. The senior management, it can represent a value of up to half. So, if you're a senior manager earning $1 million, you stand to earn a bonus of around about half that, which would be $500,000. That's effectively what these figures on the right mean. So this is just to give you a very rough overview of general market practice. That's all industries combined. As we get to various industries, different industries, you might find the figures changing slightly according to the circumstances of the industry. Right, moving on to, I think, the next case study.
Sean, before we go there, Julie's asked a question that might be well placed if we just answer it now. It's our view on profit schemes set against budgets. I don't know if you want to have a crack or if you want me to start.
Oh, you go ahead.
Cool. So, Julie, there's just a question of clarity. Are you talking about a profit share, or a self-funded scheme that's paid out of a profit pool?
No, hi, Craig.
Hi.
It's setting a profit scheme, so a management incentive effectively against a budget, which we've seen in the past causes challenges around, obviously they set the budget, and, potential challenges around, lowballing the budget versus, what they're going to get paid out.
Yeah. But I hear you. And in terms of market practice, that is by far the most common way of doing it. So firstly, a self-funded approach is usually preferable, particularly looking at companies like yourselves, and fully funding that out of profits. But obviously, you've got to get that budget setting absolutely right. And when we design schemes, we usually use market tables that look at what's a typical payout for on target and for stretch budgets, and the trick really is building enough stretch into the on target before it starts paying into the stretch. And a neat little trick that we often use is to put an accelerator curve from achieving budgets, and any rand that goes into that pool from achieving budgets, so that there's always that drive to shoot the lights out. But getting that enough stretch built into that original that hurdle budget is absolutely critical.
I think the point I would just add probably to that is what one wants to avoid in any bonus scheme is what we call destructive behaviors. And, the biggest case study in the history of mankind in terms of bonus schemes that promote destructive behaviors was the whole Wall Street crash debacle, with the, Lehman Brothers going under, all the banks that went under because they were being paid commissions without any regard for the risk of the product that they were pushing. And the products just got riskier and riskier. So linking it back to budgets, one doesn't want to promote destructive behaviors. And I've often seen people who say, if you keep your budget below 5% of what we've allocated you, we'll pay you a bonus. And in the end of the day, that's achieved by telling people to bring their own tea and coffee and milk. And, oh no, we're closing off this that we used to give you, and we're closing off that. And, the manager sits at the end of the day smiling to themselves saying, well, I achieved my target and got a bonus for it. And all they're sitting with is a whole division or section of unimpressed staff who now think their company's gone cheap on them. So I just wanted to bring that quick example in.
Perfect. Thanks, Sean. As we move on to the final case study, entitled "What is the Value?" All original staff and managers at a startup IT company are awarded share portions in return for lower salary levels. Over time, the company grows exponentially, but the share values have never been adjusted or been fully valued in terms of equity stakes. The company wants to pay a part value of the shares as a bonus equivalent for 2 years of good growth, but an audit of the deemed value shows that the shares are worth far more than originally calculated due to the growth. The founders now sit with a restrictive share ownership scheme in place, with no more shares for new staff and a large selection of original staff as minority shareholders. This creates a problem for a planned IPO listing. Interesting one, Sean.
Yes, I can't tell you how many times this happens. It's really such a common problem. When we're sitting with a company that starts up, that you can't actually put a value to play around with a 1% share or 2% shares, or we'll give you 5% shares or 7% shares. All of these things seem very easy to do. And, we don't have cash right now, but what we'll do is we'll offer you shares, and we'll hope that at some stage those shares will become of the same value to you as to the founding members of a Facebook or a Google or a Twitter, or an Amazon, that this company has been wildly successful, and those percentage points that we granted you as shares in the beginning actually now mean something to you. But that can go wrong in a number of ways. One of the ways being illustrated here, where what we wanted to achieve by saying to people, look, we can't pay you good salaries right now, but we'll give you a share of the company, actually backfired when the company gets to the stage where those shares are actually worth something. You want to go and do an IPO, but you suddenly find that 30 to 40% of your shares are with minority shareholders or people in the company. And you actually have no new shares, no new share capital or new share allocations to make to new people or new partners or new staff members, and your share scheme is actually run out of road. So moving on to what we wanted to just tell you about this is, what you look at with a share scheme or a long-term incentive scheme, What it's really meant to do is if you offer someone shares, it's a long-term view. It's taking a long-term view. And it's really saying, you know, I'm going to give you something over a period of time. And that could take any form. And generally we'll give you a grant date or an award date. You have to hold those shares for a period of time. Could be 3 years, 5 years. And we don't normally find it being longer than 5 years. And then we'll give you an exercise date where you can actually exercise those shares and sell them for some value. And at some stage, what a lot of companies do these days is they put in a final exercise date as well, where they say you can't hold the shares beyond 10 years. When it comes to the end of 10 years, you need to sell them so that we can free up shares to give to new people entering the company. So this is the general thought behind any form of long-term incentive, be it shares, phantom shares, whatever the case may be. Now, the question is then begged, what is the best format to use? Do we offer shares? Do we offer part of the company? Do we give away equity? Do we offer cash? And the answer that we found over the years is actually quite interesting. So moving on to the next slide, which is really about the various long-term incentive scheme types. What we found is that typically, you know, offering shares, unless you're a listed company where you can put, there is a fully audited value to that share, the shares held on some indice, be it the JSE, the FTSE, the Dow Jones, wherever the case may be, that there is a value to the share. Awarding shares in companies that aren't listed sometimes doesn't really achieve the aim of what the company is trying to do. So what you might rather want to do is use cash-based incentives, where you would also give targets the same way you would give with shares. So you would say, you know, if you achieve X amount of targets, we'll give you X amount of shares. At the end of the day, those shares, when the holding period comes to an end, those shares are essentially being converted to cash. Let's be honest, you know, the people will say, I have R1 million worth of shares, which I can now sell and receive R1 million. So what we find that with a lot of startups and smaller companies, instead of actually giving away equity and diluting your equity pool to the point where you're sitting with a problem, rather use cash-based incentives. And the payouts are deferred, and the payouts are subject to performance criteria, and the payouts at the end of the day should be self-funded. So at the end of a 3-year period, the bonus pool should be a size of Rand X, which then allows us to have made a profit and to have funded those long-term payments out of that pool. And that then serves two purposes, really. It keeps the people that we want with us, and this is generally reserved to the senior levels in a company and maybe 1 or 2 highly placed professionals, where we're saying to them, stay with us for 3 years or stay with us to 5 years, because if you do, at the end of that period, if the company makes its targets and if you make your individual targets, we'll pay you a nice lump sum of money. So a long-term incentive scheme really becomes a very good retention tool. The other scheme that you can try is a value-added scheme. You measure the amount of economic profit, use a number of accounting adjustments, minus your cost of capital, weighted cost of capital, WCC, and you then come up to a figure. But once again, it's a cash-based figure. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're having to give away equity, which in the beginning, as I say, those 5% might be nothing in terms of a company that's got a very low valuation. But over time, the bigger the company gets, and if it goes for an IPO, the share percentages do become subject to a lot of auditing and regulatory rules. Moving on to the next slide. Share schemes, traditional, full share schemes or options, and companies, generally companies that are listed use this. Options aren't that popular anymore because of the very volatile nature of the stock market. So if I offer you an option at 10 Rand and in 3 years' time, if I've met certain targets, that option then becomes shares, or we give you full shares from the start, but you're not allowed to do anything with those shares over the vesting period. and over that period, we hope to keep you, because at the end of the 3 or 5 year scheme, you will get a very nice payout once again if the company's met its performance targets, etc. For startups, generally share schemes are because of the very uncertain nature of the value. And if the company is a huge success, the value of those shares grows exponentially. By the same token, if the company isn't that much of a success, the value of those shares just is negligible, and it loses its value as part of the reward mix. So to sum up, the two channels that we really recommend in either of the two ways that we've shown on the previous slide is, the first is a phantom share, and that's where you evaluate your company and you then attach proper share values to it that you would do as if you were listed. The proviso here and the spoiler alert is that this will cost you a little money in terms of having it properly audited and having that share capital value checked each year in terms of your financial approach. And in this way, you actually do issue shares, but we call them phantom shares because they're not actually equity. They are units or another form of options that are linked to a share price in the company, but are given as cash at the end of that period. So once again, you're not giving away actual shares, hence the name phantom shares. And then the easiest is really the last, and this is where we find most people, because it's a bit cheaper to implement than a proper phantom share scheme, where you really look at the market-based long-term incentives. You look at the levels within the market, as we spoke about in the second case study, and you look at what cash awards you can grant. And you put the same things in place. Performance-based, you have a certain vesting period. At the end of 3 years or at the end of 5 years, you will get a cash sum of 40% of your annual salary or 60% of your annual salary, or you will get a cash sum equal to 800,000 if you've met the following performance-based targets, and if the company has made its targets and now has a proper bonus pool. And it's got the same performance, vesting and holding rules. It's subject to forfeiture if the recipient leaves. So the cherry on the cake is again retention. If you leave before the 3 years or you leave before the 5 years, you don't get any of that money whatsoever. And, you know, going back to the point made earlier, unlike base pay, it's not reliant on a guarantee. If the company can afford it, the company pays. If the company has not made targets and cannot afford it, the company doesn't pay. So often the question is, what do we do from a share point of view? And the answer for most startups and you know, companies at the lower end of the maturity curve is rather go for a cash-based LTI, or if you really want to get some form of share interest started with top management, don't go for a full share scheme where you give away equity, rather go for a phantom share scheme where you have deemed value in the company according to a financially audited share price that you've come up with.
Perfect. Sean, could I, we've got about 7 minutes left. Could I ask you to just quickly, in the last 2 minutes, just touch on some things that need to be in place, and just give me 5 minutes just for a quick wrap up.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Thanks.
So last 2 slides that we wanted to show you was, the first is what's your menu? We've spoken about all these elements, get them into place quickly, rather do them according to your needs, your plans and your time. And really the tick box is, do your job evaluation using the levels then to get professionally designed salary bands, make a little bit of an investment into market salary. It's not a huge investment. Make sure that you're linked to market, that you don't find out 3 years down the line that you've now fallen very far behind market, need to make a correction. Get your annual incentive schemes for all levels, be it sales commissions, annual bonus, whatever the case may be. And then if you need a long-term incentive scheme, cash-based, phantom shares, whatever that is, get the scheme in place, get it properly designed, and get the rules in place. Because that's the last point really, is the policies and the rules around all of these. And that's really what denotes the rules of the game. So if anybody doesn't want to play by the game or wants to take you to labor court, you can red card them according to the policies and structures already in place. So this is really your essential remuneration elements menu. And what I want you to do with this last slide very quickly is just give you a bit of an idea. And please, this costing is not set. It depends on company size. It depends on number of employees. It depends on reach. We've just taken a bit of an example where you've got a startup company that's been in existence about 6 years. It's got quite a large staff complement of about 100 people. And if you look at the left-hand side, you know, you've had, as the case studies say, a claim put in against you to raise salaries. That's cost you 180,000. You've now had to get somebody in to do what we call emergency job evaluation and get people slotted in. That's going to cost you a little bit more because there's now legal pressure on it. You need to clean salary bands, which are all over the place, as we saw in that slide earlier, outliers, people above, people below. How do we fix it? How do we now get that right? We've got a bonus scheme that's not well understood, so that has to be fixed. We've got long-term incentives that are all over the place for our senior management, so we've now got to equalize those and make sure they all fit into a new scheme that everybody understands. We've got salary adjustments now as well beyond the CCMA claim, where we know that these people are going to run to the CCMA, so that's another 150,000 out of our pockets. And then we've got to put policies in place that carry out all of that, which brings us to around about a R750,000 rand cost. And then we get to a planned implementation where we say, let's bring these things in without all the legal complications and the emergencies and drama, where we just pay for them and get them in place so that they grow with the company. And there we're looking at less than half the cost. So this is just to give you a very rough cost estimation of the cost of doing it properly versus the cost of doing it according to some legal risk or emergency or court order or, you know, important people wanting to leave. And that really is that from our side.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Sean. Lastly, guys, just to say, I know there are questions in the chat box. I hate leaving them unanswered. Please, could I ask you to direct them through Mindcore, and we will, with the greatest of pleasure, answer any of the outstanding questions. I know there were a couple of very pertinent ones that we wanted to get stuck into. And then lastly, just from Sean and my side, a huge thank you to EO, to Mindcore, and most importantly to yourselves. We've thoroughly enjoyed this session, and you know, with COVID, we've got so used to talking at blank screens. So thank you so much for interacting and asking questions and getting involved. It makes it about a gazillion times easier from a presenter point of view. So thank you so much, everyone. We've really had a great time.
Craig, thank you so much to both you and Sean. I mean, these are the absolute reasons why we love working with you and partnering with you for our clients. As you said, there are questions. I mean, if there are any specific ones, we've got about 3 minutes that, you know, we can still take one question. But I mean, this has been so informative, and I've written down a number of key takeaways, which we'll share with the group. And thank you so much. Absolutely amazing. I'm going to hand over to Joss if there are no urgent questions.
Brilliant. Thanks, Natasha. To Craig and Sean, thank you so much. I think you can see on the group chat that I think everyone is really appreciative for all the valuable takes that you've given, and particularly in the form of case studies, it was very valuable. I mean, I've also got highlights and notes of a couple of pages. So on behalf of EO, South Africa, and then the MEPA region, thank you so much for your insights. I think before everyone logs off, we've got some great news and a lovely offer. I think most of you, or a lot of you, will have attended all 4 episodes of the Talent Hub series. The Talent Hub series was something that was born out of the needs of the members, and Mindcore put their hand up, and through this process have become a strategic partner of EO in Johannesburg. As part of that strategic partner and strategic alliance, we've got already a value of close to 350,000 rands worth of product that Mindcore has offered. And as part of that, it's going to be a direct offer to members in the form of a free consultation to a limited number of first come, first serve members. So Lara's just put on the survey form. If you are interested in a free consultation with Mindcore, please indicate such on the survey. And what I'm going to ask is if I could ask Jackie from Mindcore to tell us a little bit more about what that offer entails.
Hi, Joss. Hi, everyone. Fascinating session again about 21st century. So thank you very much to both Craig and Sean. With regards to the offer, we're super excited. I think it's been a trend right throughout the series that there is no silver bullet, regardless. And so what we would like to offer is a couple of hours of our time to come in, because a talent challenge within any business is quite unique. And I love the way that Sean actually positioned it, like individuals, organizations have their own personality. Very similar to our offerings. So to come in, chat to you about where those challenges are, and then to spend a couple of hours post that to actually draw out a deliverable, be it in the sense of a talent framework, be it a job description, be it a profile, be it an interview guide, whatever that particular need is. And it may even be a case of us having to pull in partners like 21st Century and Craig and the team to assist in terms of that. So it's a fantastic time to just look at your talent strategy, and see where those challenges are with regards to what we've discussed over the last couple of series. Does that clarify?
Yeah, absolutely, Jackie. Thanks so much. And I think I speak for probably a number of companies. Talent is in this day and age now, post-COVID, has to be top of mind for all of us. I mean, you know, increases, bonuses, and all of that are in the past was such a relatively easy solution, but now we've really got to put our thinking caps on. And my last question to you, Jackie, is I think there might be a lot of, and we've spent a lot of time, I've gotten to learn and understand what Mindcore offers. Maybe you could just give us a little bit of an idea of what Mindcore does, and what could people possibly put their hand up for if they need help from Mindcore?
Fantastic question. It was actually a question that also came out of the group. So thank you very much for asking that, Joss. Fundamentally, I mean, from a core business point of view, Mindcore is a strategic partner to businesses for hiring executives and doing executive search, and placing the right talent in the right roles and at the right level, and also looking at interim solutions from a staffing perspective, as well as your entry level. And when I say entry level recruitment, it's looking at your future leaders. So, you know, from your 250 mark per annum up. So we cover the full continuum from a talent and a recruitment and executive search perspective. So that's our core business. But what wraps that and what we really look at and what we pride ourselves in is the partnership that we take with our clients and with our partners to really solve a business problem related to talent to drive competitive advantage. So we spend quite a bit of time with the companies understanding what that exact problem is, and what type of profile of person would work or disrupt or drive exponential growth within the environment. We then actually go into a different phase where we map the markets, be it an executive search requirement, where we typically look at if this role has got a high impact on the business and it is quite a unique skill, then typically that is a search type of role. So we look for the most difficult people and skills and talent at that level. Whereas when you look at your more contingent, typical recruitment, that is, there may still be a scarcity from a skill point of view. However, the impact of the role on the organization is not as huge. So there's different solutions given the problem that the client is trying to solve. In addition to that, we also do the outlying areas around culture, which we've discussed, the values and defining those, looking at the profiles and performance profiles of individuals. We've got various tools that we utilize to see what is the current performance and where should it be. And then we also provide the executive coaching components around that. Once we've assisted our clients in selecting the right talent, it's a case of, okay, now we've actually got to get them performing as quickly as possible. So from a performance point of view, you know, that speed to performance once they're in roles is so important. We don't have 12, 24 months for you to assimilate the environment. And so we look at 90-day plans, immersion, and all kinds of things, and executive coaching obviously as well with regards to that. And as we've seen across the series, when selecting talent and when building talent and when rewarding talent, it is not a one size fits all. So, but if we get it right, that link through to business strategy and workforce productivity and ultimately results and advantages from a competitive perspective is just that much easier for businesses. So our partnering with the clients is typically long-term, where we give a lot of additional support, but you know, the core business is literally looking for and finding those rare and unique skills within the market across those levels from a workforce perspective.
Brilliant, Jackie. Thank you so much, and that makes it a lot clearer. I think you know, just wrapping up on this series, I'm super proud that we put the series together. I think one of my biggest takeouts from all 4 sessions, I think the first is that I hadn't realized how much culture and the softer issues played such an important role in talent and the whole human capital space. And I think, you know, after having listened to today's conversations, so much emphasis should be I think for me, should be placed on some of the softer issues around perceived value rather than actual salary costs was very beneficial. But at the end of the day, I think the last thing that I've learned is that you can't do this alone. And I think we're super happy to have Mindcore as a strategic partner that can hold the hands of our entrepreneurs as and when they navigate their way through the talent sphere. So
absolutely. And thanks for that, Joss. And I do want to reiterate, we're here to partner with the businesses. Please, if they want to get a hold of us or you, we're happy to walk through that and provide advice and guidance wherever we can. So it's been a fantastic opportunity for Mindcore and our partners to be part of this series. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share some thinking and some learnings. But it's been a fantastic process for us as well. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, everybody. In particular to all the people who supported us over this series and for joining us for each episode, and particular to our MEPA region fellow members. It's been awesome engaging with you in the chats and in the breakout sessions. And we hope to see you guys all again soon, hopefully in person. Thank you so much and have a great rest of the week.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.